thank you everyone for coming to, I think, a very pivotal panel. I think the organizers really strategically placed this panel well, given the IPCC report that came out Monday. It's pretty exciting. My name's Haugen-Kozyra. I'm with Viresco Solutions. I come from what Skip Willis called a parochial backwater province in Canada, Alberta, straight north of Montana. And we've had the longest running carbon pricing system in North America. It's going on 15 years old. And we have generated over 17 megatons of carbon from soils. It's kind of a unique situation. And so we've got a lot of experience, and I'm really excited because working away in my cubicle in government and making things happen on the ground in Alberta, the CCX, we saw it come, we saw it go, it crashed. No one tried in 10 years to start getting soil organic carbon sequestration back on the agenda. So we got to hand it to Max and Indigo for getting that conversation started. So we have a really great panel. We've got Max DuBuisson from Indigo Ag. We have Amanda Hansen from the California Natural Resources Agency. Thank you. And Matt Nespeca from Bayer Environmental Sciences. So the way we're going to run this panel today, and I think the mantra that we want to think about here, as we see that really intriguing chart in the IPCC report with all the move over McKinsey, we've got a whole new set of cost curves for all the activities and mitigation. I think that what we want to do here is we want to look at the land and we want to turn those bars from orange to blue. And if we can get those bars to turn blue and get some significant land-based mitigation going, we'll have done our job. So the Natural Climate Solutions Alliance has a saying, which I really like, and that Natural Climate Solutions Alliance is the World Business Council on Sustainable Development and the World Economic Forum, and they're a group of market people, market makers, market takers, and they say, their saying is imperfect action today is worth more than perfect action in 2030. So I think that's going to be our theme. And I'm going to introduce each of our panel members. Then they're going to take 6 minutes to kind of talk about what they've got going on. And then we're going to do some Q&A. And then we're going to have the last 10 minutes to open up to the floor to take questions of our panelists. So, no further ado, to my left immediately is Max DuBuisson. He is the head of Sustainable Policy and Engagement at Indigo Ag. Max co-leads a team whose responsibilities include the development of carbon accounting methodologies, MRV for carbon projects, strategic engagement with external partners, building reputation and positioning within the carbon market, and engaging with corporate customers for sustainability solutions. With a background in biology, corporate environmental management, eco-entrepreneurship, he has strived to build rigor and credibility in the carbon market since 2008. Prior to joining Indigo Ag, Max was the policy director at the Climate Action Reserve for 10 years, after Derek Brokoff left, right? Eventually, right, okay. And then to Max's left is Amanda Hansen. She serves as Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the California Natural Resources Agency. She's worked in the climate space for nearly 20 years at the U.S. EPA, the U.S. State Department, and Governor Cuomo's disaster recovery team. And then immediately to her left is Matt Nespeca. Matt is head of digital business transformation with Bayer Environmental Science. He's worked for Bayer Environmental Science as the head of digital business transformation, focused on developing new business models, new ways to create value for customers, environment, and society. He previously worked as the global marketing manager for vegetation management, which includes segments such as industrial vegetation management, forestry, range, and pasture. And before he took that global role, Matt was 8 years launching and managing the U.S. vegetation management business for Bayer. In previous years, Matt held marketing, sales, technical service positions with New Farm, BASF, American Cyanamid, mainly working in industrial vegetation forestry and aquatic products. He also spent a 4-year stint as manager for the South Carolina chapter of the Nature Conservancy. A lot of background. NMS from Virginia Tech in forest biology, BSc from Auburn University in forest resource management, and he currently lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, with his wife and 2 children. Awesome. Okay. Max, the floor is yours. 6 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Karen. And thank you all for joining us. It's really nice to be able to follow, I think, that session that we saw in the plenary on offset quality and integrity. I think that's a really good session and really parlays into what we're trying to do in agriculture. It's also an honor to be here at NACW. It's exciting to see everybody's faces and how successful the conference has been. It's been exciting to see the rise in interest in natural climate solutions. When we went to COP26 in Glasgow, my colleague Guy Pinyov was commenting that not only has the whole thing shifted rapidly from should we do something to yes, we should do something, let's work out the details, but everybody wanted to talk about soil carbon with us, which was, used to be all about oil and gas and energy and industry, and now we're bringing nature in a big way. So that's really exciting. I think, I've got a couple of things to say, but if you take nothing else from my remarks, I think it should be that we do have the scientific and policy tools in place now to scale up carbon farming. And so what we need is investment and implementation and continuous R&D. So there's a lot of challenges, but we've gotten over the biggest ones, and we're ready to go. I think, your comment about imperfect action now is better than waiting for, perfect action later. That's the name of the game in greenhouse gas accounting, and it always has been. Over my years in the carbon market, I've worked with a dozen different project types, co-authored or authored 24 different protocols, and I can easily say ag soil carbon is the hardest thing I've ever worked on, but it's totally worth it. Indigo Ag, we were founded in 2014. We have a few core businesses. We do Biotrinsic, which is microbial soil amendments. We have Market Plus, which is a grain market platform, and then we have our sustainability offers, so our carbon projects and Scope 3 and low carbon grain. Our mission is harnessing nature to help farmers sustainably feed the planet, and that mission's proven remarkably durable over the years. We've grown, we've evolved, and matured significantly from the early days, but the mission has remained. I joined about 2 years ago when we started getting into protocol development with Vera, writing VM42, and then with the Climate Action Reserve, doing the soil enrichment protocol. Prior to these 2 protocols, we'd seen a lot of ag protocols that were too narrow in focus, and projects sometimes struggled with a very narrow project type and yet very large data burdens, and sometimes difficult to scale them up, and unable to adapt to variability. Agriculture is incredibly variable, and data can be incredibly scarce, and so the protocol needs to be able to adapt to that. You should expect protocols to be dynamic. I won't say that the new protocols will never change. They're both being revised at the moment. That's just the way it goes. You iterate, right? You build, you learn, rebuild. Right now, our carbon program's focused on the U.S., so we've got about 3.5 million acres under contract, row crop acres in the U.S., and we bring all those growers together into a single project. So we like to think of our carbon project as a forest, and each field is an individual tree. And so you can manage it that way. Trees come and go, but you can grow the project over time. We're also working with partners at an increasing rate, groups like Corteva and Growmark. They're the ones signing up new growers, bringing them into the program. And we've launched Carbon College, which is a free online training tools for growers and others who want to learn about carbon farming. Each of these growers is adopting new practices, but it's flexible, so they don't commit to a specific practice. It's not a narrow focus. They could do cover crops or no-till or fertilizer reduction or all of it. So we hope they get on a carbon farming journey that gets them doing all of these things. And then we've built a software platform that they can input their data, upload their documents, and then on the back end, we take the protocol requirements from the soil enrichment protocol to build out a data validation service. So as growers put in their data in real time, we're checking for protocol compliance, flagging things, hey, you need to upload a picture of that if you're going to do that, or hey, this value seems out of range, are you really sure? And in this way, we can quickly get the data through in a clean form and send it out to the biogeochemical model, bring back the results, and package it up and report for the verifier. So, what you see at the end result is a completely different type of carbon project than at least what I've dealt with in the past. So it's a dynamic system, and it can grow and evolve over time. We could have 10 times as many growers with the same system. And then when you go into verification, the verifiers are able to verify the system and how every component of the system is in conformance with the protocol. But then they're also able to drill down to individual farmers, individual fields, do site visits, data checks, like you would see in a traditional project verification, but in a sample-based approach. So proud to say we're getting to the end of our first verification. It's nigh. We'll have credits soon. And we're working on the second verification. And we're also excited that there's huge demand for these credits. I mean, I wish we could generate more credits faster because the buyers are out there and they want them. Beyond offsets, we also work on Scope 3 reductions and sourcing low-carbon grain for companies with ag supply chains. I think there's a lot of policy uncertainty in that space, and I think the folks writing guidance for that need to just make sure that they put in the effort to understand the practical realities of agriculture and ag supply chains and carbon farming. I think we're at an inflection point in the market that the old ways of carbon crediting, from industrial and energy projects just don't work for agriculture. And I admit it took me far too long to really, really deeply understand that. Karen tried. But at the same time, we don't need to abandon the established standards and approaches. So I think I've seen a lot of efforts that say it just doesn't work. We're going to leave the playground. We're going to play a different game. Through our work with Vera and the Reserve, it's clear that both of those organizations are committed to this evolution and ways to find scale. So the farmers are at the table. They have now learned that their data has value, and they're super confused about what to do about it and how to make it valuable, and they're frustrated. So I think these folks and the rest of you in the room, you guys have the smarts, you got the funding, you can make this work for the farmers, and then I think we got a massive opportunity.
Thank you, Max. Great opening remarks. Now we'll turn to Amanda for her introductory statements.
Thanks, and thanks for joining, and it's really nice to be here this afternoon. As mentioned, I am serving as the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at California's Natural Resources Agency, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our work in this space and where we see it headed. In 2020, Governor Newsom signed an executive order calling for California to really elevate the role of nature in addressing both the climate and biodiversity crisis. We are, as many of you know, doubling down on our efforts to achieve carbon neutrality. In fact, the governor has asked the Air Resources Board to look at the ability to do so 10 years earlier than we had originally been committed to doing. And in this executive order, the governor makes it clear that nature can play a key role in supporting our efforts to achieve carbon neutrality. I would also just note that in addition to the work that we can do to support our mitigation agenda, investing in nature-based solutions is also really critical to supporting our adaptation and resilience agenda. So California has 105 million acres of what we call natural and working lands. And as we see the pace of climate change accelerating, our efforts to sort of pull all levers and be pressing as hard and as fast as we can in every sector, the natural and working land sector has really sped up over the last 2 years. So we have, for the first time in our scoping plan, which is the plan that sort of sets out for the next 5 years, how are we going to achieve our emission reduction targets, how are we going to achieve carbon neutrality, how are we going to get off fossil fuels, for the very first time modeled the projections for natural and working lands to understand, how much can we count on them, how much will they actually hinder our ability to achieve carbon neutrality. And what we found is that they're critical to achieving our long-term climate stabilization goals. And if actively managed, if we do everything we possibly can now, there's a very good chance that they could support our carbon neutrality target. And so we have just invested record funding in nature-based solutions in California's budget. We have developed a natural and working lands climate-smart strategy that identifies priority nature-based solutions on every single natural and working landscape in California. And we are turning now to really drive implementation, and as Max, I think, very eloquently put it, to iterate over time. I think we're really, really committed to driving action in this space, learning, and not being afraid to have to pivot and make adjustments as we move forward. We don't live in a perfect world, and we also know that California is on the front lines of climate impacts, and so we are committed to doing everything we can to support our protection of our economy, our communities, and nature. So I think I'll stop there and hand it off, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and any questions that people have. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. Over to you, Matt.
Very good. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Karen. So good to be here. And I'm here to talk just a little bit about what environmental science, the business that I support, what matters to us. We have a global focus on native restoration, so native forest restoration as well as native rangeland restoration, and that's become a core business of ours. We like to think that sustainability is a business opportunity, as many of us in this room do, and that's something that we're building out and cascading through our organization. We provide those native restoration outcomes, both by products that help landowners restore land, but also digital products to help landowners make better decisions around the landscape that they manage or own. Most recent of those we've launched is called RangeView, which helps U.S. landowners in the West manage invasive non-native annual grasses like cheatgrass. So that's what got us here. And as far as my journey, the Western U.S., which is what I'll talk about mainly, it's what as far as from our carbon project, what we've taken farthest, is the North American grasslands have some major climate problems. Starting with the fact that well over 1 million acres a year is being lost of our native perennial grasslands to conversion to cropland. It's something that many of us are aware in this room with the protocols that exist around the avoided conversion of grasslands, which is what we're currently working on as a first step. That's a major issue. It's a major issue to focus on to help protect grasslands from this issue. The other is there's another issue related to invasive non-native grasses like cheatgrass that's degrading up to 70 million acres in the West today. So over 1 million acres a year is being invaded by cheatgrass. Cheatgrass is an annual, it's non-native, it's very transient, shallow-rooted, and when it moves into a space, it creates an environment that only it can survive in. So it's smothering and then extirpating perennial deep-rooted grassland systems, and it's being replaced by monocultures of invasive annual grass. And once that happens, it's very hard to get back. So our focus is we had a hypothesis that we're now researching very hard, which is what is the carbon impact? And of the previous research that's been done, there are studies that show as much as 50% of soil organic carbon can be lost in a system over time when it's degraded by cheatgrass. So that was our starting point a couple years ago. So we started a project focused on how do we help ranchers with this problem. Ranching is a really, really tough business. It's a business where it's very low margin. There has been carbon offers in the past, but overall, they need additional revenue streams. They don't have a lot of resources to get things done on their property. And carbon projects are being viewed today as being very expensive and complex and hard to manage. And that's kind of the concept that a lot of large landowners, even in forest landowners as well in the U.S., view that is the current situation. So what we're bringing is we're developing an easy-to-use platform that helps ranchers build financial stability by bringing carbon finance to ranchers through their actions, and in turn also helping build out a very strong co-benefit attachment of all the co-benefits that go along with keeping and restoring land. So biodiversity, reducing catastrophic wildfire in the West, all those are outcomes of the protection of land from things like cheatgrass. So our project starts with protection, with the avoided conversion of grasslands. That's our MVP, like our minimum viable product, and that's what we're standing up, working and collaborating with CAR to get that done. And then we see the development or expansion of the protocol into the avoided conversion to cheatgrass. So how do we develop the science necessary to build the models to be able to determine what is the avoided emissions outcome by keeping our pristine landscapes pristine? So that's really what we're focused on. And to me, the opportunity here around grasslands, especially in North America, is that, the carbon finance, when brought to this picture, is really important to the rancher. And I'll say it, and I know Max had a similar sentiment. The ranchers are the heroes of the story here. Ranchers have conservation intent. They want to see their landscape protected. They want to see it sustained for future generations. But they don't have all of the access. They're early adopters. There's people out there that are willing. They know they have a problem. They are willing to address that problem, and they're trying to figure out ways to fix it, but they just don't have the bridge, that financial bridge to get there. So the co-benefits around healthy landscapes, healthy native perennial systems, along with something like having carbon finance to be able to take us that last 20 yards, last 10 yards to a finish line is going to be very critical. But just think about the large conservation deals that are getting done based upon that finance, because it's a lot. It's not just carbon at stake. It's a massive amount of natural ecosystem value and health that's being protected. So that's what I'm passionate about. It's something that, through my career has been very important. And again, being at a forum like this to talk about it is really, really fun. So thank you all so much. And thank you, Karen.
All right, great opening comments. I'm thinking, Amanda, you're squished in between two bookends of croplands and grasslands. So this is all exciting, which California has a lot of. So the next 20 minutes, we're going to have an interactive discussion where I've got some questions, and we'll have our panelists answer the questions back and forth. And so we'll do that for 20, and then the last 10 minutes, we will have questions from the floor. So the first question for our panelists is, how do you see natural climate solutions, nature-based solutions evolving over the next year? I think this next year, it's a formative year for guidance. We've got the Net Zero SBTI. We've got the FLAG SBTI, Forestry, Land, and Agriculture. We have WRGHG protocol working on land-based guidance on how removals will be treated in corporate inventories. You've all heard about the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets and the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative. There's a whole lot of stuff that is happening in the next year that needs to be finalized in order for people to feel confident in activating. So I guess in the next year, where do you see the things you're working on NCS, NBS, or even writ large? How do you see that evolving? What are we going to get? Are we going to get to more certainty? What is needed in the next year, in your opinion?
So one thing I hope we see more of is implementation of these standards and guidance that's being written. People trying it, taking it off the page, and seeing how it works, and so that we can learn from it. I think that's crucial. And then I think the other thing is we've seen, over the last years, wonderful increase in technology coming in, more remote sensing available, new approaches to the sort of data science behind what we're doing. And so I think seeing that progress and seeing it work its way, more and more into the market.
Well, I'm annoyed because I think you read my notes. I'll second everything that Max just said. I think another area potentially of growth, at least in California, but I would be surprised if this isn't true in other places as well, is the integration of nature-based solutions into more and more of our policies and more of our sort of sectoral efforts. So I will be partnering with our transportation folks to think about how we can integrate nature-based solutions into some of the projects that they're undertaking. Similarly, working with the state's business manager and thinking about how can we utilize our procurement and other sort of levers that we have that can drive important markets in this space. So I think the policy landscape is going to be shifting rapidly And, we'll have to sort of learn as we go, and I think collaborating with one another to make sure we're learning lessons from one another will be also really useful. So I would just add that to what Max already said.
Right, and before we turn to you, Matt, I think we did 12 revisions on the conservation cropping protocol in Alberta, 12. So iteration, learn by doing. Talking to Aaron Schroeder, he's like, you need the 4-H motto, Karen, and 4-H is a really great program for farm kids, is just learn by doing, and don't be afraid, and, fail fast, and then get up, do it again, iterate, learn, share. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, what I hope happens, and what and how I would like to contribute to that is really is I really think we need to unleash the supply side. And the supply side are the landowners. And these are people with faces, with lands that, are very meaningful to their heritage, their family. There's a lot of big decisions that have to be made by these people. And again, like I said, we view them as the heroes. This is who we serve. So, scaling with those people, with all of these ranchers and being able to build it up, that's ultimately what we have to do. We're working on a pilot commercial, project, and we want to be able to launch that. And we plan to start that in the next year. But like so many other platforms and projects that are being done, everyone sees the power of what technology is going to bring to the table. That if we're allowing landowners and ranchers to be part of a platform where we're sharing data about all sorts of aspects of their ranching operation, how does that help build a much smoother verification process? And then how can we collaborate with folks like CAR to help build that into the next revisions of the protocol? So to me, I'm a believer in technology, but I'm also a believer in the conservation ethic of the people that we're serving to do the right thing. So what I'd like to see is to see that supply side really take off in the next year.
So what we're also going to see, and what we're already seeing, is transparency, price discovery, exchanges starting to get out there, because, it's bilateral spot markets, they don't serve the people that you guys are working with, right? There needs to be clarity. There can't be asymmetric information, because you need to build that trust. And I love what did you call it, Matt? Your college, your carbon college? Carbon college. That's awesome, right? Because you got to bring people along. The terminology in this space is awful. So you try to speak to farmers, and they're just lost, or ranchers. And so we have to make it, the taxonomy we use has to be common, it has to be relatable, and that's going to be one of the key things to be able to engage the people we need who are doing all the good work on the land. Okay, cool. The next question for the panel is, what are the top 3 challenges you are encountering as you attempt to deploy these NBS, NCS activities on the ground? Now, it could be an offset, it could be an inset, the corporate inventory, or programmatic policy approaches. We've got all 3 on the panel, I think. Some people are looking at insetting. So what do you see as the top 3 challenges you're going to need to overcome?
So one immediate challenge is weather. When you're dealing with agriculture, you lay out these wonderful plans, you've got this operational calendar, and you're like, we're going to do this, and then when it's time to start with the first this on the list, and the farmer's like, no, the soil is frozen. You can't come out yet, or it just rained, you can't be on my field. And then suddenly, your 3 weeks of soil sampling is 2 months or whatever. So, it's a constant reminder that we're dealing with a natural system, which is good, it keeps us honest. I think the other agricultural-related challenge is the Perennial Ag Challenges, right? It's hard to get data. It's hard. Growers weren't collecting data for 5 years knowing that someday, a person in a suit would ask them to plant cover crops. So that's a challenge. And then on the other side, data to actually validate models, it just takes time to get those data. But on the non-ag related, my sort of like higher level challenge is the pace of development of standards and guidance. And I spent 11 years developing standards and guidance, and it moved at a slow pace, and it needs to go faster.
We only have 8 growing seasons left in the temperate region. That's 8 growing seasons. Amanda, over to you.
I couldn't stick to 3, but
Good.
I only had 4. So
Okay.
the first that came to mind was sort of the obsessive focus on carbon, which of course I'm at this conference, so this is not a great audience for this comment. But, I feel that there's a real lack of understanding about the value that our lands deliver. So just sort of broadening our thinking to understand that these investments, yes, they deliver carbon benefits, but they also support food security, clean water, clean air, local economies, biodiversity protection. We've been through a couple of these things. So I think, if you're just focusing on carbon, you're not seeing the big picture. And if you're not seeing the big picture, then you're not making decisions based on everything that's available to us. And so that's one challenge that I see to deploying nature-based solutions. Another is just letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. We've discussed this already, the need to iterate and to understand that, just like any other sector, we're going to be learning as we go. And so we need to get going. The latest science has told us there is no more time. So the third one that I wrote down is just funding. And upfront costs. It takes time for these solutions to deliver the benefits that we know will be delivered in the long run, and so we need to start now. They operate on decadal timescales. And then the fourth is actually what you were just talking about, Karen. It's just overcomplicating. I mean, when I got to California, I was like, "What are natural and working lands? Like, what is that?" And I've worked on climate for a long time. Why do you call it that? Anyway, so just people don't know what it is. People don't feel empowered that this is a sector that they can contribute to. It is not an accident that in the natural and working lands strategy that I mentioned, we have more priority nature-based solutions in developed lands, which is essentially communities, places where people live, than any other landscape. I think it's very important to help people understand more about this sector and that they can contribute. So those were my challenges. I could probably keep going, but
Thank you.
We should be positive.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one that I think about right off the bat is scaling. And the reason why scaling up on the supply side is difficult is we always sit and try to figure out the right balance of how do we bring the speed of innovation to the table by using technology, using tools that maybe we haven't used before to drive kind of that exponential growth curve, at the same time maintaining maximum integrity in the work we're doing in collaboration with partners. I think that's a balance, and it becomes hard to do because you want to go out there and just plow through this thing as fast as possible, build the biggest teams of ranchers to enter them into aggregated projects, but we always still need to stop and reflect to make sure that we're taking all the right steps. And as a newcomer to carbon, I mean, I've been playing with this for a couple years now. I feel like I need to surround myself with really smart people that understand this market around the pathways that they've experienced before. But so I think that to me is still a struggle to figuring out that right mix. The other one is just the science. Kind of Max said, sometimes it's just really hard to get out there and get the science done to be able to understand the delta between these different practices and things that people are doing on land, and what is the impact long term, and then how can we create those models to be able to drive that into a carbon solution. And then finally, I'll just say one of the things that is a real challenge is the noise. There's a lot of noise out there on both sides, and that noise does not make it easy for, when you're a rancher and your family has owned a piece of land for 150 years, and somebody's coming to you with something that's very new, and then there's so much noise about, not just noise around the negative of like, well, you really shouldn't do that long-term agreement on your property. What are you giving up as far as your options, even though it's in their best interest and they have conservation intent. So you have a lot of that noise, but then you also have the noise just around expectation. So then there's a lot of people out there that are driving very high expectations as to what some of these ranchers can achieve in an arid to semi-arid landscape of the western U.S. We have to be very realistic about what we can deliver, and we have to be able to keep them focused on, again, that not just the carbon opportunity, but just the co-benefit opportunity as well. How do we attach those co-benefit those co-benefits, attaching them into a transparent view and attaching them to every carbon credit. How do we start to create value, beyond carbon with the carbon offset itself because of the identity preservation that we can do around these credits, where they come from, and this pristine landscape that we're protecting? We need to start building quantitative measures to do that. Not just storytelling, but quantitative measures to be able to start separating out this integrity issue from a pricing standpoint and from price signals. So,
great. As we're sitting here, Amanda, maybe this one is for you. When we rolled out the offset system in Alberta, there was a collaboration between the Department of Ag, Environment, and the NGO that was running the offset system where I worked. Dr. Janet Peace, she hired me. We did town halls, and we built a series of trading simulations, just not electronic, but just having a bunch of people from the land in the room, and then going through, here's what to look for, giving them the education around the carbon market or the programs, and then we divide the room into, everybody gets assigned a big emitter and an offset supplier. We had term sheets, right, so they could understand, it became less scary for them. This is like a lot of transactions I do, but they need that information. And actually, Dr. Amias Kabriab took our whole package, and he uses it in his classroom at UC Davis. So it's something that can be organized, right? And maybe Indigo doesn't have time, or Bay RES doesn't have time, but to engage with the ranchers and the farmers and do the sort of mock simulation exercises, it kind of brings it down to be, okay, I get how this is going to work, right? And describe the opportunities that are there for activities in the marketplace. Yeah, happy to share. Now we're going to open it up to the floor, I think. Anybody raise their hand, have a question? We don't have mics on the floor, but you could stand up and pose some questions to the panel. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of tons per acre, the thing with the soil enrichment protocol, you could have different crops in different places with different practices. So it's a wide range, and it depends on the history of the field as well. So, across a broad average in the first year of the program, maybe half a ton per acre or less, quarter ton per acre. That should go up for most of these fields. Depends on the practice. Cover crops, you see a pretty good benefit right away. No-till, it's going to take more time, and then it might shoot up. So we'll have a different profile for every grower. And then on the question of degraded rangeland, it could, in some ways, be addressed already through the soil enrichment protocol or VM42 if there's a practice change. So if it's been degraded through the grazing activities and you switch to a rotational grazing system, and you have a model that's calibrated and validated for that system, you could do a project right now through one of those protocols and change to rotational grazing. That would be your additionality. You'd do some soil sampling, set your initialization, and that's an area, right now we're working with Descent and collecting the validation data needed to bring grazing into the project. So at some point our project will expand to include grazing.
Yep. No, and that's ultimately what we're working on. And I think by starting with the avoided conversion of grasslands protocol, it gives us a basis of understanding of how to bring solutions to ranchers, how to solve problems for them. But ultimately, what we are after that 70 million acre problem that exists in the U.S. with that massive expansion of invasive grasses that are increasing wildfire and depleting soil or organic carbon. But the the science is being done. There's a lot of work to be done. So if I was to say, and I can't say today that when a site is invaded by a really bad set of plants like cheatgrass, ventonata, medusa head, what is that 30-year effect over time when a site becomes completely degraded? How quickly does the soil organic carbon separate from a pristine landscape? But we're out there doing with and without studies right now this year to try to understand that so that modeling can be done. But our goal and our intention is to collaborate with CAR to figure out what that will look like and figure out, again, it's either going to be expanding the avoided conversion of grasslands protocol by looking at coefficients in models that would be able to kind of fit a new curve based on different soil types, or starting from scratch. But we're committed to that process.
The only thing that I would add is in California, we've just been required through statute to build up a registry to connect nature-based solution projects with funding. And part of that effort is going to involve the Air Resources Board, ensuring that we have the quantification methodologies and protocols required to, ensure that that's a credible and authentic system. So, we're going to be spending the next year and a half doing that, undergoing that review and taking a look. So, would encourage everyone here to weigh in with us on where we need to go. That's all.
I think Max might be the right person to.
I'm not sure I fully grasped the question. Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe I'll try and paraphrase. I think she's saying, how do we modernize the methodologies that we have today to be able to accommodate all this digital transformation that's happening? In ag tech startups are really difficult, and it's really difficult to get those ag tech startups to be a unicorn. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay. I do have a lot of ideas on that. So I think it comes down to a transition that's been underway for several years, moving from highly prescriptive approaches to results-based approaches. I think the grassland protocol is a good example of that, of we don't know what you're going to come up with, but we know the outcome we want to see. And I think the sort of deeper, more fleshed out version of that is with both of these methodologies, both registries have modeling guidance. So for the first time they said, you can bring whatever model you want to bear. These are the guardrails. And so this is how you go through it. You want to use 2 models? Fine. But you got to have this incredibly in-depth and detailed calibration validation report that you get an external expert to review and jump through all these hoops, and you have to quantify all your uncertainties along the way. So they put in place both the guardrails and the incentives, right? Uncertainty is there as a keep you honest kind of thing. If you bring a bad model, you get no credits. And so I think those are the kind of approaches that are going to allow people to start to innovate and evolve without, again, having to write a new protocol every time somebody's got a new technology.
Yep.
Well, so Karen's got thoughts. The approach taken with this modeling guidance is that you actually get it reviewed by somebody else. So the verifiers don't have to have that expert. Now, we need more of those experts in the world in general reviewing these things. But then also, once a certain model has been validated for a certain domain, it could be used by other projects too. So you could have people doing off-the-shelf validation reports that then other projects can use. And the verifiers don't have to do that review. They have to tick the box of did you have that review done?
And just to touch on the technology too, I think the one thing is we have to have, when you're solving a problem with new technology and focusing on that customer problem, we have to have faith around, is it worth solving? And as a commercial entity, we're driven by that. So when I'm thinking about ways we're building out a carbon module into our current RangeView platform, I'm building functionality that, because of the data inputs that it's going to be able to collect, I know that I have faith that I'm going to be able to use the insights from that data to create my next product. And in some cases, I don't know what that product looks like. Just, I know it's going to serve the ACG protocol today, but this information is constantly developing the insights to create the next solution. So part of it is as a commercial entity is having faith that the technology is worth developing. It is worth investing upfront as much as possible to be able to scale these things or to build them really quickly. So
I might just add to that, because Betty's here. And so we brought the Canadian Avoided Conversion of Grasslands protocol, first one that the Reserve approved for Canada. And we're doing a pilot on the ground, and we are bringing these things to bear, and the Reserve is being very, very flexible. You need to just demonstrate it, right? Whatever tool you're using. Hey, we don't have to have an expert go out and do an ecosystem health assessment, Betty. We've got a digital tool for that. And she'd be like, well, okay, you're going to have to prove to us that the digital tool is resulting in the outcomes that we need to be assured that carbon content of that protected grassland isn't being compromised. So the Reserve is totally open to modernization, but there has to be a demonstrated justification to it, which is, part of the process, right? Yeah.
I think the owners with conservation resources. My question has to do with the trading unit, and I admit that two backgrounds to this. The first is complete ignorance. I'm new to carbon, so I may be asking an ignorant question. But the second is, as a landowner with 650,000 acres of timberland and ag land, the trading unit, as I understand it from everything I've listened to over the last day, is a ton of carbon permanently sequestered. Why permanent? If I'm putting a ton of carbon into the ground for 10 years, why can't I trade a 10-year unit and the buyer can then buy credits in the future to offset that? If I have to make a 40-year commitment or a 100-year commitment in timber, I'm not going to do it because I'm tying the hands of future landowners, and I don't know what the impact of that is going to be on the liquidity of my land. So it seems to me like we're a very immature market. If all we're selling is a 40 and 100-year deal, and ag may be different, but it seems to me like a much more mature market would have a range of dates that we love to scale up the volume on the supply side, but we're not going to do that until we have a much more flexible set of dates or terms.
Yeah, the first thing to think about is what's the asset we're creating and what does it do? So if we're creating an offset, that means the offset I sell gives my buyer permission to emit, right? It's a permit to emit. And they're going to put a ton of carbon in the atmosphere, and it's going to be there pretty much forever. So we couldn't define permanence as forever, so 100 years is where it has landed. And for our ag projects, we're held to the same 100-year standard. There have been programs using temporary credits, and they didn't go anywhere. People didn't want to have to rebuy their credits every 10 years. So I think those are the short answers. There's more to it, and there's more creative ways, especially with farmers, aggregating them together. We handle permanence at the aggregate level, so the individual farmer is not making a 100-year commitment. Indigo's making a 100-year commitment to a pool of carbon in the country, and then we're tracking every single field. So there's different ways of looking at it, but I think that sort of like core baseline still makes sense, at least to me.
And if you've been listening to some of the discussion around Article 6, corresponding adjustments, are we going to bring the voluntary carbon market into that context of Paris? We want fungibility And fungibility of carbon means 100 years permanence. There's lots of mechanisms to guarantee that, but we need that, I think, because I think that's where the world's going. You had a question?
I just had a follow-up question to that, because to me it seems like if you had things trade or being denoted in dollars per ton here, that would sort of solve that issue. And if you think in the future there's any hope for the market to get to a dollars per ton year market instead of a dollars per ton market, to differentiate that way, you could differentiate between mineralizing CO2 in the rock that would be as permanent as emission versus putting something into a tree and something like that.
But Karen, do you see that occurring at the offset level and the pricing on offsets based upon
Ton-year accounting?
Air capture, or as permanent solutions or solutions that maybe have a little bit more risk to them, that you start to see isn't the pricing separation occurring based upon some of those standards around offsets?
Are you talking about the ton-year accounting?
Well,
like
yeah,
for
ton-year-
permanence?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got the Integrity Council, right, who's going to bring some rigor to the whole space. We're seeing, ton-year accounting came up. So under the CDM, the Kyoto Protocol mechanism, there was not one sequestration project. It was temporary credits. But ton-year accounting was on the table back then, but nobody implemented it. So that was 2003, 2002. So I'm seeing way more momentum now around ton-year accounting. But when we're talking half a ton per acre or 0.25 tons per acre, ton-year accounting, if you're only going to get 20% of that 0.5 or 0.25, that's a tough sell. With forestry, I think it has a lot of potential. We're seeing it working in Mexico, right? So I think it's going to be a real challenge for the ag space on 10-year accounting. All right, how are we doing for Jean? In your cap and trade as an offset solution, right? Using offsets?
Using offsets, but not necessarily the cap and trade. Maybe voluntary markets. I'm hoping to looking for incentives to make a difference.
What do you think, Max? Oh, yeah, so I can repeat that. So Jean Olay is from Co-op Carbone, and they've been trying to work with farmers on the ground in Quebec for a very long time. And so he is asking the panel, how would we go about deploying a nature-based solution opportunity for farmers in Quebec?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much of an answer beyond project design and VM42 with Vera. So, the key there is, what are they going to do? So you got to look at the common practice and what's available to your growers in terms of a practice, because we have looked at some regions of the world where it's they've got this great farming community, the partners are engaged, the growers are engaged, and there's just not much juice left to squeeze from the fields. They're actually doing a lot of good stuff already. There's a lot of practices that are common. So it's going to be different in every region to figure out, what's available for the farmers and what are they going to do. And, then do you have the quantification, tools to make it work? So in most cases, that'll be a model or potentially, a soil carbon sampling campaign over years with control sites and things like that are being proposed at Vera. And then a good data management to pull it all together and get the data collected. So what we're finding is we wanted to have it done at a really big scale, so we built a really big, data management program. So it's like sort of overbuilt for the first verification, right, because of the number of farmers, but then you can just feed it more and more farmers. And then the other thing in Canada, of course, the federal soil carbon protocol development effort. Keep an eye on that.
Yeah, that'll probably be out in 2023, late 2023, Sean. It's going to take some time. But there's also the corporate supply chain, value chain initiative. So that's an insetting. But you start at the same place. You have to, they recommend you start with an approved protocol from some voluntary or compliance, and then you adapt it into the supply chain and get corporate investment. I think Danone's very active in your province. So, they would be looking to engage with milk producers to build out a supply chain program. And so that's a different type of market. It's an inset market, but there's a lot of motivation for companies like Danone because they're moving towards net zero SBTIs, probably have to set a flag, SBTI, and then they want to be climate positive. So they want to go beyond their value chain to make a real impact beyond what they're committing through net zero. So that's a whole other opportunity that could be available. It's not additionality, it's causality. So there's good things that happen in that context. And permanence, they're still working on it, on how that might play out in the supply chain carbon. And then, there's a lot of good things that fit better for ag. I'm not trying to promote it, but it's a pathway. It's just saying it's a pathway. Okay, we'll talk about it. Well, I think we're at the end of our time, so thank you for hanging in there with us. Rocky start, but I think we got a lot of information out of this, so thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your sessions. Thanks, guys.